This is day 134 of the Ukrainian resistance. This is Media Center Ukraine. My name is Vasil Samokhvalov. We are ready to start our discussion about what is happening to the Ukrainian society, what is happening to each and every one of us in the area of mental health. And we have a group of psychology, sociology, and mental health professionals present here. We have Mr. Orest Suvalo, coordinator of community-based mental health services development at the Ukrainian-Swiss Mental Health for Ukraine project. Is everything right? Okay. We also have Ms. Natalia Zaitseva-Chipak, sociologist, director of Socioinform Research Center, and Ms. Halyna Netliukh, executive director of the Ukrainian Catholic University's Mental Health Institute and representative of the Ukrainian Institute of Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. And we also have Ms. Vilena, psychoanalyst, coordinator of Lviv Crisis Psychological Service. I really hope that I got it all right. The first question is very simple and straightforward, and hopefully it will set the tone for our discussion. You decide who starts. So what is happening to the Ukrainian society? What is happening to each and every one of us? Who wants to start? All righty. I guess I will get this ball rolling. I guess we all can feel and see what is happening. We are living in the midst of the war. Any war is something scary, traumatic, and stressful. Each and every one of us is having their own experience. We all are feeling the toll of the perpetual news about the unraveling of events in the eastern part of the country. Along the front lines, there's definitely an impact on mental health. But I guess we need to start with what mental health is. So we need to make sure that we are on the same page. According to WHO, mental health is a state of well-being when a person can cope with the stressors, when a person can work fruitfully and make a contribution to their community. And all these four mental health components are being assaulted by the current situation in Ukraine. Barrage of information messages, losses, pain, grief in the aftermath of the war. So mental health is under enormous duress and strain, which means that we all need to master coping skills. We need to learn how to endure, how to withstand, how to be flexible and resilient. But I guess you will hear more from the colleagues. And Natalia, maybe you can use the language of numbers. So what do we know from, say, sociology? Well, first and foremost, I would like to point out that the Ukrainian society has experienced immense stress. What we have experienced in the past 4 months is a tall order for the Ukrainian society. But at the same time, we need to understand that people are adaptive creatures, and it's very interesting to observe the findings of different sociological studies. We can see that there's a step-by-step gradual social adaptation. The rating group took some measurements in April and June, and they made a comparison. And their findings demonstrate that step by step, surely but gradually, people are maintaining an even emotional keel. Well, there are some challenges. A lot of people complain about fatigue, exhaustion, sleep disturbances. But in terms of the stress load, this is something that people have more control of. In April, the evaluation of the stress condition was about 3.5 on a scale from 0 to 5. So 3.5, it was closer to 5. Right now, this indicator is about 2.9. So average indicator. We can also observe the gradual adaptation of the population. At the same rate, according to the rating group findings, about 61% of the population feel more adapted, while 39% respond that they haven't really adapted yet and they are experiencing enormous psychological stress and strain. And there are some other sociological findings. Diverse groups are experiencing psychological load and stress in different ways, shapes, and forms. Females are more vulnerable. The older people are, the more difficult it is for them to cope with the war experience. And it's also more strenuous for those people that are engaged full-time in comparison with part-time employees, unemployed, and retired people. I guess it's related to the fact that not only are people experiencing the war as a phenomenon, but there's also a lot of economic stress. A lot of people lost their jobs. They cannot really predict what will happen in the future. They cannot really do any life planning. It's also obvious that IDPs are more vulnerable to stressful experiences in comparison with those people that haven't been relocated. If we have a look at the situation by regions, the population in the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine is under more duress and stress than here in the western part of Ukraine because the situation is safer here. We are faring better from an economic perspective, and there are more possibilities here for people to preserve their previous or pre-war lifestyle. There's another interesting study from DEM Initiatives, and this study demonstrates that there are two key emotions within Ukrainians. On the one hand, this is hope, expectations. And on the flip side of things, it's not even fear. Let me peep. Maybe it's something along the lines of disbelief, not disbelief, anxiety. So basically they are being torn apart between hope and anxiety. Well, I think it's a natural condition for a lot of people. So 50% are overflowing with hope, while 50% are brimming over with anxiety. As for fear and the feeling of being lost, these negative feelings are experienced by every fifth Ukrainian. And the same is true of positive feelings. But if we have a look at the numbers related to the future of Ukraine, I guess hope prevails. 61% of Ukrainians in terms of future are experiencing hope and positive expectations, while the remaining part are experiencing some anxiety. Alrighty, I have a point of clarification because I've read about a different hypothesis. We experienced the first phase of the war in a calmer manner because everyone galvanized into action. And now, when the war is growing into a routine, we have already depleted the psychological and mental resources of our bodies, and the rate of depression and disbelief is growing. Well, I guess I'm the next one to respond. In fact, if we're talking about what the Ukrainians should be bracing themselves for, well, we need to prime ourselves for a marathon. It's a lengthy, long-lasting process. It's not a sprint. If you ask those people that are marathon runners, and if you ask them what is important for a successful marathon, you need to know how to pace yourself. You need to know how to replenish your resources to make it to the finish line. And our task as a society, our task as a nation of Ukrainians is to do the exactly same thing amidst these trials and tribulations. So we need to develop our resiliency. It's a term that is a buzzword right now. And resiliency is about certain life patterns and behavioral patterns. Well, can you explain this term in simple words? So what is resiliency? It's like stress resistance. Like, I use the following metaphor. Like, if I have raw egg and a tennis ball, and if I drop them, which item is more resilient? Which item is more impact resistance? I mean, if I drop a raw egg, it will just break down, it will lose its shape, and the tennis ball will get deformed. Some deformations will be there, but under certain conditions, the tennis ball will regain or restore its previous shape and might even improve it or enhance it. And it's in addition to what Natalia said. On the one hand, any war is a trauma, stress, it's an adverse effect on the quality of life, on mental health, but on the other hand, it's also about growth. Studies testify that those people that were subjected to trauma and stress, if they coped, they also demonstrated post-traumatic growth. So it's essential to focus not only on the negative facets of the war. Of course, we need to shed light on trauma, PTSD. We need to create mechanisms to help people cope. But we also need to have a look on the bright side of things, because we stand a good chance of coming out even stronger after this war. So basically, we're talking about the intersection of two possible or potential pathways. What can we do not to be these fragile eggs? What can we do to be these elastic and malleable balls? So how do we take care of ourselves? How do we take care of our society, of people around? So once again, back to my original question, what is happening to us? What is happening to the society? Well, Vasil, you want to hear the answer about what to do, but I want to present a more practical or down-to-earth perspective on things. I'm a psychologist. I'm both a theoretician and a practitioner. It's been stimulating to hear some sociological findings, and I would like to corroborate some of these findings. Well, usually people come to psychologists when there's an urgent need, when people are fragile. Well, I cannot really make judgments about the entire society, but what is happening to us? I mean, the word transformation that you put on the table, transformation of the society, transformation of each and every Ukrainian, is a very broad concept. And we can observe the process of transformation from the outside. But if you ask those Ukrainian residents that are experiencing this process from within, you might receive a different answer. And there's an animated discussion among psychologists. During the first 3 to 4 weeks, it was all about immediate response. We responded to this full-scale invasion. There were multiple stress and shock responses. Each and every citizen of Ukraine was shocked. And even those Ukrainians that were outside of Ukraine exhibited very similar shock and stress responses. Everyone was first and foremost concerned about whether it was safe to leave the country. People were lost about what to do. They were not really sure whether to save their business or save their life, or maybe join the army and go to the front line. Then during the next 2.5 months, there was a different psychological process, which we call reflection. So we contemplated, we pondered what happened, what else can be done, where is my place, where is my role, what do I need to survive? Am I capable of continued life? So the result of this reflection had to answer the question, what should I do next? So it was more about long-term strategy. It was more about future orientation. I'm fully supportive of the words by my colleagues. It's a marathon. This is something that we realized as a result of this reflection. And right now, we are experiencing the process of reconstruction. We are reconstructing our personal lives. We are reconstructing our institutions. Well, can you explain it in simple terms? So what do you mean by this reconstruction? We all have experienced a loss. We lost our safety. In the first place, we all had some plans for our life. We had some plans for the summer. Maybe some people intended to enter universities. Someone wanted to have a vacation. We forged some business and personal plans, and most of these plans were development related. But because of the war, we had to adjust our plans and expectations because the focus is on survival. So reconstruction is all about replanning or planning update. It's all about new routes, new pathways, new avenues. We are tormented by fears and anxiety, but we need to separate these things. And this is something that my colleagues referenced. We do have this anxiety, and this anxiety is related to uncertainty. We are not really sure when this thing will come to an end. We're not really sure about the final outcome. Of course, we are brimming over with faith in our victory, but we cannot really guarantee that that will happen. And so this uncertainty has a heavy toll on how we plan our lives. We are trying to understand how to survive this summer and where I can remain a Ukrainian here in Ukraine, here in Lviv. Some people had to relocate. Some people decided to move to the western part of Ukraine and stay here, while other people are flirting with the idea of leaving the country. So it's all about life planning. It's all about life routes and pathways that we have to reconstruct and rebuild right now. Also, coping strategies, survival strategies. This is something that we are rethinking and reframing, because some of these coping strategies were successful during the first weeks of the war, but they have already exhausted their potential. So we are compelled to look for some other internal resources that we can use as supports. And it's also part and parcel of reconstruction. This is something that we did not do in the past, but it's an endeavor that we have to embark on right now. If there are any additions, please articulate them. If there are questions or comments from the audience, you can also give a signal. I would like to add, do Ukrainians have plans? Are we still planning? Because there's still a high level of uncertainty. Well, maybe psychologists will comment on how optimistic that is. But according to the rating sociological group findings, 76% of Ukrainians respond, yes, it's about me, I am building future plans, and 12% of Ukrainians disagree with the statement. So about 12% of Ukrainians are not capable of any planning at this point. But Ukrainians still have an avid interest in life and living, and about 86% of Ukrainians state that they are still interested in what is happening around. But there's a red flag. 6% of Ukrainians respond that they don't really care about what is happening around, and it's not a very good stat. Well, back to the language of stats, I would like to point out that we had a joint meeting of the ministry and the government of Ukraine, and I've heard some numbers from the prime minister. We have about 15 million people who require psychological assistance, and of them, 4% require pharmacological assistance. What does that mean? Well, maybe Orest can comment on that, but I would like to respond to what Natalia and Vilena said. It's a comment on reconstruction of our life and behavior. About 70% of Ukrainians still have some plans, and it's a good prospect because it means that we are inching towards post-traumatic growth. But I want to go back to the issue of resiliency of this tennis ball. So what are some of the characteristics or features of a resilient person? Resiliency is like a muscle, so we can grow this muscle, we can make it stronger. And the first thing that makes us resilient is a bond with our values. So the knowledge why it is happening, why we are doing that. So this war broke out, it's still raging, and we know our values. The second important characteristic here is hope. So it's all about planning our life, changing our life, but still planning. So it's all about having hope. It's all about having positive expectations. It all boils down to our mindset, our emotional well-being. Emotions are not a problem per se, but what we do with these emotions is of paramount importance. And another important component of resiliency is social support, social network, social relations. So there's this POM of resiliency, behavior, thoughts, bond with values, spirituality, senses, resourceful emotional conditions, self-care, and the fifth component is about social interaction and mutual care. Well, I just wanted to wrap up this topic of resiliency. Hopefully now you have a better understanding of this concept. Well, I would like to veer back to the issue of pharmacotherapy. But what's the secret sauce then? I mean, does it mean that we need to build plans and have faith in them, or we just need to preserve our appropriate psychological and mental well-being? Do we need to maybe rehearse it on a daily basis? Well, we need to be attentive to ourselves, to our emotions. We need to have a good awareness of what is happening to us. If I'm sad, what can I do to overcome this sadness? What is the best way for me to be sad? If I'm anxious, then what triggers this anxiety? How can I support myself? We all are anxious because there's a high level of uncertainty, and it's only normal. And we are learning to tolerate this uncertainty and this anxiety. No one can provide us with any assurances or guarantees. But once again, it's all about finding external and internal supports. All right, I will revert back to that, how we can tolerate anxiety. What about these stats? What is happening to the country? I will go back to that, but I would like to add something to what Natalia and Halyna said. In fact, planning in the conditions of uncertainty, in the conditions of anxiety that results from this uncertainty is a good recipe for control over the situation. But what about continuous destruction of plans? Well, that's why we need to understand for ourselves whether we can plan our day. Well, this is something that is feasible and realistic. So you don't really have to do or engage in long-term planning, but you can at least plan each and every day. And this is something that will help you survive the day in a less stressful way. Sociology demonstrates that most Ukrainians have coping skills for anxiety and life planning. But back to your question about medications, this information was floated and it evoked an animated response in the professional community. We're talking about drug-related interventions. It's a gray zone. We're not really sure about numbers. So if we're talking about specialist interventions, there's a lot of fear around such interventions because it's all about stigma. I mean, if I have to take drugs or medicines, it means that I'm crazy, that I'm nuts, which is not true because we know that medications can be effective, like, for example, antidepressants that do not evoke dependency, but if you take them appropriately, they can be effective. But it's all about awareness raising. So we need to communicate more information to our society. So it's not really about more people needing medications in the future. It's more about people having their needs met. And this is something that the Halyna referred to. It's all about the community. How will our society, how will our communities respond to these diverse challenges? Some people will require psychological aid. Some people will require peer-to-peer support. Some people will require psychotherapeutic assistance. But it's true that some people might need pharmacotherapy. During this war, we find ourselves in a very vulnerable spot because when the war broke out, we were in the midst of health reform, and the war exacerbated all these vulnerabilities. And unfortunately, many people do not really have adequate access to medical care. Hence the question. So we have 15 million, well, let it be 15 million, like 4 million. So 15 million require psychological aid and 4 million might require pharmacotherapy. But will they have access to required care? And will it be evidence-based care? I can relate to the fear provoked by these numbers, but we need to change the focus of the discussion. We need to give thought to a broad plethora of interventions that might be needed. Well, I can express my opinion as a layperson, and that's why we are having this discussion. It looks as follows. Our society will be profoundly traumatized. We will have multiple diagnoses within our society. So as a layperson, I would like to hear what are these potential diagnoses and how to treat them. So that's what I read as a layperson. No, I can totally identify with you. But back to the conversation on trauma. There's such a phenomenon as normalization. It's normal to feel like that under the current dire situation. It's normal to feel sad, upset, despondent, anxious. Not everyone will require assistance. Normalization is something that we need to be attending to. We need to explain it to people that you are not going crazy, you will not go nuts. These are normal responses. You are experiencing normal emotions in this abnormal situation, in this abnormal reality. But back to our upbringing, you know, when you feel bad or upset, there's a lot of stigma about that because we were taught not to complain about that. I would like to add something as a sociologist. it was mentioned that we need to take care of ourselves, we need to be attentive to our needs. But sociologists try to analyze things always from a societal perspective. It's not only about being attentive to ourselves, but it's also about being attentive to other people around us. We need to keep in mind that each and every person experiences this situation in their own way. So we need to be sensitive, we need to be susceptible. We should not really provoke any unnecessary conflicts. One researcher studied suicide, and he said that the more socially engaged a person is, the smaller likelihood that this person will commit suicide. So it's essential and crucial to network, to maintain social relations, call your friends, call your group mates, classmates, stay in touch, talk to people. Well, I agree with that one, but back to you. I will serve in the capacity of a skeptic. All these are beautiful words, you know, this poem, 5 components of resiliency, it's all good. But we have separated families. So we have families that are physically separated, and it's a threatening situation, because if people cannot live together physically, if they have to be separated, there might be some bad consequences and ripples. Deaths of family members, material losses. Well, there are some generic tips. I mean, let's network, let's stay in touch, but what do we do? I mean, there are traumatic situations, and this is something that we see in every second or third family. You mentioned those things that have already happened. So we have people who have already lost something, or there's also a social danger here, like there are separated families. But right now, we need to concentrate on what? Our main task right now is to survive. This is our primary priority. It doesn't really matter whether your family is separated or not. I mean, this issue takes a back seat. It's important, but it takes a back seat. And we need to know how to tell ourselves, I will think about it when the time is opportune. So maybe later, a professional will help you understand that. But here and now, I need to survive. This is my primary task. If I am successful in surviving, then I can give thought to how I can survive with higher quality. Like maybe I can have higher quality food, maybe I can decide who I want to talk to, or maybe I don't really have enough resources to communicate with some other people, or maybe I want to walk somewhere, or maybe I should hop on a bus and tram. So you can also think about quality. It's also part of grounding. To cope with the current tasks, there are some other things that we need to do. There are 3 musts or 3 essentials that I would like to communicate. We need some sort of support, something that we can fall onto. People are looking for a support figure, a parent figure. People are looking for experts or professionals. We find them, we listen to them in the evenings. It's like these intelligence updates, right? So we need someone to explain everything to us in down-to-earth and simple terms. Well, do we need to be practical and down-to-earth, or we need to be optimistic? Well, optimism is a very controversial and contentious issue, because we might have a different perception of optimism. So it's all about being tangible. It's all about receiving down-to-earth, neutral intelligence update from people who are well-versed in the situation. And we already have a number of such experts. So most people listen to the same people if they want to know what to do. And these are not experts that are given to us. We identify these experts ourselves, and sometimes these experts are very positive, while sometimes they are quite negative, and we are familiar with it. Well, some experts come to my mind. And there's another thing that we need to do. We all seek a safe haven. We need to have a safe place, a safe haven, a safe shelter. I know that educational institutions are getting ready for the next academic year, but we have multiple residents that have to seek shelter in basements, really cluttered basements. So we need to make sure that people have a safe place. They know where the nearest shelter is, because that will definitely enhance our sense of safety. And we cannot really build these shelters ourselves. What else do we need? We also need to have a better understanding of how things will unfold in the future. Well, we can socialize, but what if you call a friend and this friend is depressed and dejected and is even in a worse emotional state? So cohesion is also important. So basically, any kind of socialization is necessary. Any cohesion, I would call it this way, any cohesion and socialization. And mental health professionals, we are always happy to help. I would like to add something about socialization. Socialization is basically about support of the community, support of the environment. We have a working group, and we are visiting IDP host communities. There's a litany of needs, and not all these needs can be satisfied. For example, there are people with disabilities. But what do I see in our Lviv community, in Lviv region? There are a lot of positive initiatives to ensure safety. If we're talking about a bomb shelter, safety can also be a comfortable setting where you will feel confidence, where you will feel support. We do have some tangible problems, like, for example, the next academic year is around the corner. So this issue of bomb shelters is a pertinent one, but it's not only about bomb shelters, it's more about safe places as a broad concept. They are there, but they are not sufficient. But here we can tap into the enormous potential of communities, those communities that are hosting IDPs. And it's also about our ability to galvanize into action, to mobilize our internal resources, and our willingness to lend a helping hand. Well, I would like to make a point about experts and professionals. You are talking about people that understand that something is wrong with them, and then they approach professionals for help. But the majority of people do not even know that something is wrong with them. They are depressed, they are dejected, they are in poor mental shape. There are negative thoughts battering their minds. So what to do in such a situation? Or maybe I will reformulate my question. What should our care system be in society? I mean, the care system cannot be the same as pre-war. There has to be a proactive position on the part of the government, on the part of the society. So how do we treat our society, and how do we treat each and every Ukrainian? I guess we need to appoint doctors. By that, I mean a figure in the community. How do I know when to evacuate? So someone has to tell you. It has to be a city mayor, or maybe some sort of military commander. So someone needs to let us know what the level of danger is and what to do. The feeling of stability and safety in the community has to be informed. Like, we cannot really decide it for ourselves. So there has to be some sort of system or structure in place. But are you trying to say that someone needs to tell Ukrainians that they need to go and receive a medical examination? Well, I'm talking in symbolic terms. During the first days of the war, we trusted the words of Lviv city mayor, Mr. Sadovy, and this is something that we can be comforted by. We have trust in our city mayor, and if the situation exacerbates, if the situation deteriorates, we will not be waiting for the last evacuation train, because you know what the current situation is in occupied communities. Some people complain there that they did not really know that it was time to evacuate. So someone has to assume this responsibility and provide clear-cut guidance. I'm not really talking about medical doctors. Well, maybe Orest can complement. Well, my point is that there are very few people who are aware of having some mental health problems. So they're not really sure whether they need help or not. So the question is, how can we be more proactive? How can we be more proactive in taking care of societal and personal mental health? How to know where to go if you're having some issues? Well, we should not medicalize the problem, because this is something that we see in the mass media. Everyone who experiences a traumatic experience will definitely develop a PTSD. Isn't it that way? No, not everyone will develop a PTSD. And it's not only about PTSD. There's a wide array of mental health disorders, depressive disorders, anxiety disorders, substance-related disorders. But what about alcohol and drugs? Aren't they escape routes? Aren't they treatment modalities to a certain extent? Based on studies, we know that even before the war, before the escalation, substance or alcohol-related disorders were the most prevalent ones among men, because this is the way men cope with mental health issues, including depression. And what is the most accessible and available substance here? Alcohol. But back to your question about how we can resolve the issue of care. We need to understand that there are already some well-developed and established pathways and protocols how you can receive mental health care and psychosocial support. There's a certain logic there that we try to comply with in Lviv region. It's all about meeting basic needs. It's all about shelter, food, roof. It's also about family support, relations, society, family. The third step, non-specialist care, care that you can receive from a social worker, from a school psychologist, from a social worker of a psychological service. And the last step is specialized medical care, but this care will be needed for a small percentage of people. So this is the logic that we try to follow within our communities in Lviv region. Because a person might be depressed or despondent, but it will be too expensive for this person to go to a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist, or for example, such a professional is far away. But if you have a professional in a community, but it's important to have professionals that can relate to condition of people who lost their homes, lost their properties. So this community-based professional can support such individuals, and then these individuals will not really need a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist. So the idea right now is to give training to more non-specialists how to provide community-based care, how to provide community-based support. Community-based care is crucial, and this is something that we need to understand. I fully agree with Vilena and Orest, but there's another component that we need to heed. It's all about good psychoeducation. You were asking how a person can know whether it's the right time to go to a doctor, whether they are depressed or not, or maybe they're just in a bad mood. So it's all about outreach and awareness-raising initiatives and campaigns. We can teach adults, well, we teach adults and children to understand whether they caught a flu, and they can know that based on specific symptoms. So if they are exhibiting these symptoms, they know what to do. It's the same with depression. There are specific signs and symptoms that we can teach. Well, depression is a common mental health disorder. Depression is like a mental flu or a mental cold. So we need to alleviate stigma around depression. Depression is yet another condition, and mental health care is as important as physical health care. It's indispensable to develop mental recovery skills. It's all about basic psychological hygiene. We teach our kids to brush teeth, to heal wounds, but what about our emotions? What about our thoughts? For whatever reason, we do not really do enough awareness raising and training there. So it's all about psychoeducation initiatives and campaigns. We need to place emphasis on prevention as well, because this is something that can deter mental health problems. And by dint of these campaigns, we will be able to remove stigma around mental health issues, and people will have a better understanding of what to do. So psychoeducation, outreach, awareness raising. We have already progressed a lot in this regard in comparison with 2014. We are taking better care of mental health. So this mental health care culture is being shaped. And I hear about it from colleagues because there's a mounting number of people asking for psychological assistance. So once again, it's all about psychoeducation, awareness raising, outreach. I had a very interesting experience. I would like to receive the feedback of my colleagues about it. That was about 15 to 17 years ago. I participated in a WHO study called Mental Health of the Ukraine population, but it was an international study. There was a long questionnaire there. I mean, a questionnaire that required 1 to 2 hours to fill out. It was like a psychological screening. And there were different indicators there, and based on these indicators, you could understand whether you were recommended to seek help from a professional. For example, you've lost over 5 kilos within 1 month. I mean, if you have not been on diet, if you're in a bad mood, if you're suffering from sleep disturbances and you lose weight, then maybe it's a sign of depression. But anyway, right now we are more tech savvy. So why not have a basic screening tool? So why not have it in the Dia app? Almost each and every citizen of Ukraine has the Dia app on their cell phone. And then you fill out this questionnaire, and you will receive a conclusion about whether you need to seek help or not. Well, but I think there's an element of stigma there as well. Well, I have a point about self-treatment. I am a supporter of self-treatment. And I agree with Halyna about the importance of psychological hygiene. In a normal situation, when something goes awry, we notice it because we understand that I've been different for 3 months, or I've been different for 6 months. Is it typical of me, or maybe this is something new, maybe this is something that is bothering me. I've gained 6, 7, or 8 kilos. So I guess that was my response to stress, but I don't really like it, so I have to do something about it. So it always helps to compare yourself with your younger version. And you can also compare your responses to the responses of other people around. How are other people responding? It can also be a sign of whether you're struggling or not. Through such comparison, we might identify some differences that are not desirable, and then we can decide whether to seek help from professionals or engage in self-treatment. There's another point that I want to contribute. Vasil, psychotrauma. What is your understanding of psychotrauma? I don't know. Well, I've been told that our society is experiencing psychotrauma. I believe. Well, you've said several times, what if a person has no clue that something is wrong with them? This person continues living, this person is experiencing hardships, but there's no awareness, so there's no critical thinking there. There's another phenomenon that can be mentioned here, dissociation or withdrawal, or detachment. So we try to detach or dissociate, not to go crazy. Well, I call it in a different way. I'm in a hut. I'm in my shell. Exactly. I'm in my shell. I'm unaware of what is happening around. It's a normal response. Look at people around. We have a lot of people, and they hear from brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, employers that something is wrong with them, like you're different now. So, I mean, if something is wrong with you, you will hear about it from other people. But back to psychotrauma. How can we avoid psychotrauma? Well, I thought you would tell me. You're not asking. Please tell me about it. There's no one-size-fits-all approach here. There's no single recipe here. But there's one good practice, for example. If a traumatic event occurs, it's an event that is traumatic based on objective criteria. So let's assume that this traumatic event happens today. You find something out, or maybe something happened and you witnessed that event, or maybe something happened to you. Do not go to sleep right away. Something else has to happen between you experience this event and you go to sleep. It's a very simple recipe, very interesting. It flies in the face of we need to sleep on it. There's this saying, we need to sleep on it. So it contradicts the saying. Well, something else has to happen between that traumatic event and before you go to sleep. You need to shift focus, you need to switch your attention, and then you can go to sleep, and then you will feel better in the morning. All right, thank you for that. We've heard a number of crucial things. We need to be this elastic tennis ball. Now we know that there's a need for a psychoeducation program in Ukraine. We also know that we need to be proactive. People need to socialize, they need to be employed, they need to continue living. So it's all about being proactive. I would like to summarize our discussion a little bit. Well, thank you very much for your on-point statements. But in summary, can you spend about 1 to 2 minutes talking about what else we need to do to preserve our mental well-being? Well, maybe Natalia can use the language of numbers because she's a sociologist. But once again, just a very brief summary, 1 to 2 minutes for each of you. So how do we live under the circumstances? 2 minutes. Well, I will not be able to talk for entire 2 minutes, but I would like to single out some key points. The understanding of mental health is crucial. Psychoeducation is another critical component. This is something that has to be incorporated into our society. This is something that has to be employed on various levels. We should discard and debunk myths, and we need to be aware of useful stress coping techniques. As Vilena mentioned, stress and trauma are integral parts of our life. This is something that we will not be able to avoid. We started with the definition of mental health. Mental health is your ability or capacity to cope with stress. You do not receive your salary, or an unpleasant situation happens, it's also stress. But stress is also bombardment. So we need to understand what stress is, and we need to know how to cope with different stressors, because these stressors can be diverse. So mental health, outreach, awareness raising, psychoeducation, ability to cope, coping skills, and how to cope with stressors and psychotraumatic situations in an effective manner. And network building. Network building, support networks. We need to support our dear ones. We should not be fearful of seeking help from our family members and dear ones. This is a resource that is not expensive, and this is something that you cannot replace with anything else. So, well, I will continue because I have a mic in my hand. I fully agree with Orest, so I don't really want to sound repetitive. This war came into our life. Life is not the war. And we need to continue living despite and in spite of everything. But to continue living, we need to listen in to our inner world. What are our values? Why is all this happening? Why do I have to endure all this suffering? So it's all about what kind of person I want to be, what kind of life I want to create. So it's very important to listen to these internal bells. I fully agree about psychoeducation, and keep in mind that you have a choice. You choose what to think, you choose how to behave. There are certain areas of life that you can exert control over. And back to resiliency. Resiliency does not mean that you are a steel person, or we can be resilient, but at the same time, we can cry, we can be fearful. It's about our humanity, it's about our human nature. We should not be afraid of being humans, but at the same time, we need to tap into all our best qualities. We need to unleash the best qualities that we have, and everything will be Ukraine. I would like to offer some practical tips. Allow yourself to be different than in the peacetime. What was judged back then, what was frowned upon back then, is not true now. Everything has changed. We are in a completely different situation. What we called inconsistency in the past is called flexibility right now. You should feel free to change your plans if it's necessary. It's okay. It's about flexibility. And flexibility is part and parcel of resiliency. So afford yourselves to be flexible and seek high quality shelter. Demand it. There's no room for private shelters. You need to have that safe place. You need to know where that safe place is, and you need to know that you can claim it. This is something that can comfort you and soothe you. I fully agree about cohesion and networking, unity, family relationships. It doesn't really matter where your family is. You still have this family bond. It's more about the inner feeling. I mean, I still have a bond with my husband. Well, I might have some suspicions, but I think it's still better. I mean, it's better for me to have that suspicion, but that bond is still there. I still have this bond with my better half. Take care of those people that require your care. If you have children or grandchildren, you need to take good care of them. This is something that will replenish your internal resources as well. And some mundane things that you can tap into where you are. If you are in Lviv, great. It's a beautiful city. It's well preserved. We have multiple businesses operating. We have neat coffee places. We have this media center. Be in touch with the external world. Stay in touch with the external world. We have a multitude of partners that are supportive. And what else? I don't even know what else to say. I guess that's it. Consume delicious food. Have solid sleep. These are beautiful tips, not only for the time being, but for our entire life. Well, Natalia impressed me with numbers, the percentage of Ukrainians still planning. I guess it's a testimony to our unbreakable character. Well, I want to raise our discussion to a societal level. We need to continue cherishing hopes. Hopes for Ukraine becoming a better country, a stronger country, a more prosperous country. Hopes of Ukraine developing and growing. And when can we have hope? When we see that there's progress. And we cannot just sit and wait for the war to be over. I believe that each and every one of us, where we are, can do something here and now to achieve improvements in different sectors, education, health, business. And there's another thing that I've been tumbling around in my mind. So you have a person that is full-time engaged, and this person is more adapted than a part-time employee. Or why is this full-time employee better adapted than a retired person with guaranteed income? Because it's important to feel your own utility. People want to feel needed and useful. I'm not really sure whether that happens, but when we learn to find our place in this world, when we learn to be useful in different capacities. Some people can support IDPs, other people can volunteer in shelter, someone might combat propaganda on the internet. When you feel useful, you are happier and you are more resilient. And I really hope that we all will be able to find our own place. Thank you. Thank you very much. Today, we've had a very important discussion about the mental health of Ukrainian society and the mental health of each and every one of us. Well, it's not as bad as some people think, and it instills optimism. We had Mr. Orest Suvalo, coordinator of community-based mental health services development at the Ukrainian-Swiss Mental Health for Ukraine project, a long title. We also had Ms. Natalia Zaitseva-Chipak here, sociologist, director of Socioinform Research Center, Ms. Halyna Netliukh, executive director of the Ukrainian Catholic University's Mental Health Institute and representative of the Ukrainian Institute of Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and Ms. Vilena, psychoanalyst, coordinator of Lviv Crisis Psychological Service. So those were our guests. Thank you, everyone, for this stimulating discussion.